Welcome back to another year, another anniversary. While my previous year's analysis went under the radar, I don't really care. Okay, I do. I think it's one of my most underrated videos and actually hasn't aged much. So, just like last year, I also want to analyze the hell out of my favorite segment of the anniversary stream, usually called Art Showcase. This time, the Polygon Slave has taken some precautions in advance, so I can't meme him for hiding weapon skins live on stream. I still found some leaks though. You really have to commend the devs. They could have easily cut the leakiest segment out, but they're sticking to it. For that, I do indeed think they have Unkar's balls. This year my main focus will be gathering info on the new set of secondary weapons, as well as speculating on various notable findings. That means that this video has the potential of aging like milk as soon as Season 2 is out. Alright, I think that's enough meta humor. Let's start off by looking into the driller's weapons on the artboard. First, I want to bring attention to the sludge pump's concept notes. Most of it syncs up save for this part. From the sounds of it, the charged shots were to use a separate ammo pool on a conceptual level at least. Then the dev shows a bunch of references used for the sludge pump's appearance. Ranges from fire hoses to floor cleaners to a literal water gun. The concept art is all very different from its final appearance, except for the silhouettes. My favorite from these would be the yellow one here, although it's admittedly a little too compact for a driller primary. After that, the artist starts showcasing the Gamma Burster, or its final name, which is Colette Wave Cooker. In the weapon notes I found "no a military weapon" a little too funny. Another note referencing nuclear fuel popping out. Clearly this was before deciding that it wouldn't need to reload. Small burst that lasts a second and then a little cooldown before it charges up again. Sounds like a huge hint on the way it may function. This one seems to have no references, but definitely has concept art. Again, a lot of these iterations seem to be very different from one another. But there seems to be a running theme of the weapon surrounding the driller's hand. Or in other words, whole hand go in like Mega Man. We do get to see what this weapon might have looked like if it still needed to be reloaded. For a brief period we get to spot a few art director notes for this weapon. Seems like originally he wasn't very keen on it wrapping around the hand due to armor clipping. Then, in game the dev quickly showcases the weapon live. It does indeed seem to have that burst fire thing, where it can be tapped for a burst fire consuming 5 ammo, or held down to keep firing until it overheats. Later, the dev shows off an early iteration of the Wave Cooker's model, seemingly a bulkier version of it, which syncs up with some of the weapon notes from earlier. Next up are the Scout's weapons, starting with Drax's notes, which seems to completely sync up with the final outcome, although it does come with cool concept art of course, as well as these 4 variants that were teased a while ago. From the art director's notes, it seems it might have been planned to house a magazine at some point. I'd speculate this magazine would have been swapped out on overheat only, as there's also a visible note from a game designer about changing the fuse upon overheat. Here we get to see some early screenshots of this weapon's rough model. Then the artist scrolls through a bunch of color variations of the drag. Personally, I kinda miss the original black and white look. Next comes the crossbow, and I have some stuff to talk about here. First come the weapon notes. These 4 lines with question marks are evidently a developer trying to pin down on its appearance. Another note below talks about a manual reload. It usually means that the player has to press the reload key themselves to initiate a reload, even if the weapon is empty. In this case, I'm fairly certain it's simply an animation note that the scout would load the bolts or arrows manually. And lastly, a note about different types of arrowheads, which I'll get to soon. Afterwards, the artist shows off various references, this time not as interesting, and lots of concept art. We get a rough idea of what the harpoon version of this weapon would look like. We also get to see some arrow concepts here, hinting at poison and explosive arrows. Of course, this is just concept art. A bit later, we get a look at the early in-game appearance. It mainly looks like the same model but untextured. And later on here, we can see some super crusty notes from the game designers. I'd like to thank Tomfoolery and some other users for deciphering these. I didn't think there's anything too noteworthy there, but just as a fun fact, this is what the text says. Moving on to its in-game appearances. For a few seconds we can see the developer holding the crossbow with 3 bolts? The HUD in this scenario also doesn't shy away from presenting us with additional information. Since the crossbow is a single-shot weapon, it makes sense for the reload key to be used as an arrow type swap. The faded arrowhead icon appears to have a little bolt coming out of it. Speaking of arrow types, the dev shows off many of them right here and wants for the community to take a guess as to what they do. Well, I can do you one better. First, I'll fulfill the dev's request and take a surface level guess at all of them. Then, I'll provide you with leaky answers me and some users over on my Discord server are able to figure out. Alright, from left to right I'd guess it's a cryo bolt, due to its resemblance to the cryo grenade. Fire or explosive bolt. High damage bolt. Penetrating bolt. Neurotoxin bolt, with similar effects to that of Driller's neurotoxin grenade. Electric bolt, as already evidenced by the crossbow video teaser. Poison bolt, and multi-bolts. Now with the leaky answers. As you can see, I've had the camera zoomed in on the viewport. There's a lot of garbled text around the screen which correspond to these arrows. You can take your own guess at what these texts say, but here's what we were able to gather. Cryo arrow, fire arrow, default arrow, broadhead arrow, pheromone dart, electric arrow, poison arrow, and triple arrow. It also seems that the fire arrow has multiple iterations, and a 5-arrow variation is available which may be unused. The dev then proceeds to keep stacking the arrows as a quick gag. Onto Gunner's weapons, starting off with Hurricane's notes. Everything seems to sync up aside from this. I guess in the end they felt an indicator for active rockets was unnecessary. After that comes the concept art. Most common theme between these is indeed the salvo rocket launcher style. And here are the early screenshots. The stream froze. And here are the early screenshots of the Hurricane. This early iteration of the model is quite different from the final design. Next is the coil gun, specifically its weapon notes. There's nothing we already don't know here aside from the area damage part. Then comes the concept art. This time around there's not as much of it. I should note that the artist himself gives some insight behind his own artwork during these parts that I'm glossing over. As for the art director notes, a dick joke. We also get to see some early screenshots of this gun, which is fairly close to the final version save for the lack of textures and DRG X9 plastered on its side. This iteration of the coil gun would have involved this ring, which would be pulled back as the coil gun charges. But Mikkel almost obsessively wanted to kill it. Oh yeah, and this is what tomfoolery was again able to get out of the garbled text. The dev then shows off the gun in-game, effectively giving us extra teaser footage of it. One of the devs also notes that the coil gun's trail actually damages enemies that touch it. Next up are the references for Engineer's Lock 1, or Loki as I call it. In the concept art section we can see that the original idea was to have the gun's barrel snap onto various targets, instead of making the bullets home in on targets. At the art director notes, there's an idea from around that something on the weapon would react to auto-aim calculations. This has definitely survived with the tiny camera on top of the gun's barrel. It actually looks towards the enemies you have locked onto. And we get to see a bunch of early screenshots of this gun. There's a lot more when compared to the other weapons. Most notable bit is likely the stripped down version seen here. Yeah, I wasn't able to spot anything out in terms of the secondary. But I did find a few spicy things which I'll get into after Rival Tech. With Season 1 came strange new robots. Naturally, their designs needed to go through a lot of iterations. But before I show off the concept... Oh no, I can barely read the enhance. Seems the original idea was that the facility would be abandoned. But the part about it being from a different company has stuck around. You'd have to find 2 to 4 generators and hammer them so a manual kickstart mechanism pops out. This mechanism is described as bars sticking out of the generator. Each dwarf then grabs a bar and starts walking to make it spin. This kinda sounds like that mechanism dwarves would have to push in Project Dwarka. Once all the generators are reactivated, the central station would then boot up, releasing more drones. The dwarves have to reach the station and initiate its deactivation process by hammering it. Then Mission Control will send in a nodes dispenser, which would need to be connected to whatever parts the station shoots out, and only then will it expose a weak point, in this case a vial of some sort. When all the vials are taken out, the dwarves can then claim the core hidden inside. Yeah, the mission flow has definitely changed a lot from these notes. Well, let's take a look at the concept art now. There's a ton of it this time around. For a moment we can spot out what those vials might have looked like as well as the early generator. Okay, yeah, that's just like opening gates in Dwarka. And the early drone designs consisted of wheels packing heat. Of course, the artist quickly scrolls through a bunch of interesting artwork, but insists on showing off Hexy, which I can actually give you a better look at. The RGB keyboard seemingly became RGB fans on release. For a moment, we're shown artwork of rival tech weapon frameworks, then various Caretaker references and concepts, some of which include cool screenshots of their early iterations. And at some point, the Caretaker was going to be mysterious, floating energy things. Perhaps that's a bit too minimalistic. And here are various artworks during its upside down pyramid phase. If you think that's all, you're mistaken. They even did concept art for the hacking device. The dev says that the early idea was that you'd have to throw it like a grenade onto a hackable machine. For the in-game parts, the dev reveals a hidden function behind the data deposit. Apparently it's been designed so the prospector could dock it. Each opening in the deposit matches the prospector's tentacles and beams shockingly well. Even its legs plant on top of the deposit nearly perfectly. The dev also mentions some interesting AI details for the prospector. For example, the longer it's on the map, the more minerals and dirt samples it'll be carrying, since in its passive state it constantly goes between scanning and digging until provoked. Then, we are shown various towers that were originally going to deploy robots during the central fight. As we all know, in the end the pyramid itself deploys robots. Finally, the artist showcases a bunch of different datacell iterations, also commenting that their appearances have gone through a ton of changes. That's all the notable rival tech stuff. Now for various other changes I was able to spot out. First and foremost, near the start of the segment I saw pink cat ears and an orange fedora in the background. Multiple times throughout the segment these strange decals are visible in the background. The one on the left appears to be some sort of logo. It's hard to make out what it says below it, but our best guess is Greyland Corp. Whatever the case, this could potentially be the rival company's real name, or at least their early name. When it comes to the decal on the right, I have no idea. Looks like some graffiti. A thing the artist does multiple times is open up this menu, officially titled as a cheat menu used by the developers, and me, to speed up testing. But I want to bring your attention to this area here. It's used for spawning creatures, and we can see their respective file names. ED Spider or ED Spider Grunt. Then we have ED Flying Smart Rock, which are the flying rocks summoned by the Omeron. The most interesting is this one, ED Terminator. As of Season 1, it's not in the game files. It's pure speculation from this point, but I'd guess that Terminator is a robot specifically built to exterminate dwarves, which is likely part of an upcoming season event. I think that idea makes a lot more sense when you consider the fact that Season 2 is basically the next chapter to the whole rival company thing, as in the robots are adapting to their newfound threat, or this could be some scrapped experiment. Now, on a less leaky note, when the dev first shows the Unreal editor, we can see these cosmetic items at the bottom in a folder titled Oddish. Oddish is some sort of a DLC used for testing, likely when they decided to commit to the cosmetic DLCs model. I had no idea what the DLC contained and assumed it was just a bunch of placeholder cosmetics, but here we get to finally peek at them. There's a moment when the artist showcases various lock skins and this unseen one. My assumption is that this is the early version of the Copper Patinate skin on top of the Megacorp framework. For very few frames, the strange completely white glyphid appears. Of course, the Mini-Mule saga continues with this art showcase. For the second year we were shown a new Mini-Mule model, which went unused due to its tiny legs. For the third year, I could barely make it out in the distance and seemed like one of them was modified. I came to the conclusion that it was going to be used for an unknown mission type. For this year, the developer almost purposefully shows us the model. This entire time, that odd-looking Mini-Mule model was really just loaded up with various explosives. Ever that mysterious mission type was, it likely included sending an explosive bot somewhere. Honestly, looking at it again, I could easily be very wrong here, and that extremely blurry screenshot might have nothing to do with this Mini-Mule. And I saved the most intriguing bit for last. This one is legitimately making me feel dirty. For a moment I was able to see this text here. Season 2 Content Close March. 9 weeks. There's no possible way to figure out if the week counter gets updated or when this was written. but it could point towards to a possible release date that the developers are aiming for. If going under the assumption that the week counter gets updated, it seems to point towards the last week of April. And the developers themselves have already said that the update won't release until April. Of course, for all we know, those weeks could be counting up, as in how long they've been doing this March for. Just that the update coming out in 9 weeks seems very feasible. But what do I know?